なり意図的にトランプさんは
そうだ。
Meanwhile, another issue on the agenda. In the policy speech Prime Minister Abe delivered in the Diet yesterday, Abe says the Japan Coast Guard, police, and self-defense force personnel are on duty to protect Japan's territorial land, water, and airspace. He says he wants to express heartfelt respect for them. Lower House Speaker Tadamori Oshima asked the House members to be seated. Many LDP lawmakers stood up and applauded during Abe's speech. In today's Diet Steering Committee Board of Directors meeting, Democratic and other opposition leaders expressed their protest against the standing ovation, describing it as abnormal. LDP officials admitted it was inappropriate. They conveyed the protest to Prime Minister Abe and called for understanding of the party members to be careful about their behavior in the Diet. Tomorrow, the Upper House question and answer session will begin. Renho is to take the Diet podium for the first time as the Democratic Party leader to ask questions of Prime Minister Abe.
In the deaths of two men who died of poisoning at a hospital in Yokohama City earlier this month, more details are emerging on how the intravenous drips had been kept before they were administered. The investigative focus is on how and when the drip feed solutions could have been tampered with. The two men died at this hospital in the city of Yokohama, Kanagawa Prefecture. Media crews are interviewing hospital officials outside the hospital. The two elderly patients died only 2 days apart after they had been administered tainted IV drips. The hospital head, Yoichi Takahashi, fielded media questions this afternoon. He says he's appalled and infuriated, wondering how something like this could happen. A doctor who works for the hospital made this comment. She says the only thing she can do right now is to keep providing her patients the best possible medical care. She says all the staff members think the same way, and none of them have quit working or have called in sick since suspicions emerged. The police suspect that IV drips might have been tampered with, resulting in the poisoning deaths of the two men, Shozo Nishikawa and Nobuo Yamaki. More details are emerging about how the drip feed fluids had been kept before they were administered to the two patients. On September 17th, IV drips to be given to the two men and other patients over the next 3 days were delivered to the nurses' station on the 4th floor from the in-house pharmacy. The IV drip packs were reportedly stored in cardboard boxes and labeled with the dates they were to be used. Yamaki was last drip fed on the night of September 19th. He died the following day. Nishikawa died on September 18th after being administered an IV drip earlier in the morning. The date of use had been labeled on each of the IV drip packs. The police suspect that someone might have tampered with them, knowing when they were to be administered. Professor Masayuki Kiryu of Toyo University is an expert in criminal psychology. He says tampering with IV drips without raising suspicion is likely a scheme thought up by someone with a medical background. Kiryu says the person responsible was probably in a position to know when and where the scheme could be executed without fail. He says it's highly likely someone working at the hospital was responsible.
Next up, today's watch. How will the latest discussions on labor reform change our working practices? A government panel has embarked on discussions to reform working practices in Japan. They include improving working conditions for irregular workers. Among the people anxious to look over the course of discussions at the panel is 67-year-old Emiko Teranishi. Beg your pardon. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says related bills are to be submitted to the Diet with a sense of urgency. Abe instructed the panel to prioritize the issues of equal work for equal pay, to improve conditions for irregular workers, to increase wage and productivity, and addressing long working hours when compiling an action plan before the end of this fiscal year ending next March. Among those anxious to look over the course of discussions at the panel is 67-year-old Emiko Teranishi, who heads a group of families who lost their loved ones due to overwork-related deaths. Her husband Akira took his own life due to overwork 20 years ago. Teranishi says the discussions to amend long working hours are to take place, which is a wonderful thing. She says the issue will finally be addressed. She adds she has high hopes for its outcome. What are her impressions of the panel? Teranishi says she got the impression that panel members include only a few laborers. She says she's a bit concerned that issues posed by current working practices may not be fully discussed. New Imperial Household Agency Grand Steward Shinichiro Yamamoto met reporters. He says his wish is to support the Emperor and Empress and other members of the imperial family while listening to their ideas. Yamamoto's appointment comes as the 82-year-old Emperor expressed concern last month that it may become difficult for him to carry out his duties as his physical condition declines. Yamamoto says he'll work closely with the Cabinet Secretariat to see that the issue is addressed. Yamamoto's predecessor, Noriyuki Kazuoka, also met reporters. He says he's been watching the Emperor carry the weight of his duties as the symbol of the state and the earnest actions of the Emperor and Empress. He says it was most fortunate that he was able to work for them and feel their compassion. Renowned novelist Toyoko Yamasaki will be remembered at a memorial event on Thursday. She wrote many full-length novels with strong messages about the modern age and Japanese society. They include the best-selling works The White Tower and The Sun That Never Sets. Ahead of the event commemorating her death on September 28, 2013, editors who have long worked alongside Yamasaki visited her grave in Osaka. This editor says she'll never see her again, but she wants people to read her works, discuss them, put them on their thinking caps, and then take action. She says Ms. Yamasaki will be pleased. The novelist's grave will be open to visitors for 4 days, starting Thursday. Is this rover exploring the surface of the moon? No, this is the sand dunes in Tottori Prefecture along the Sea of Japan coast. Our reporter says what could be Japan's first moon rover has arrived at the Tottori sand dune. The rover measures about 60 centimeters in length. It traveled on the uneven ground to check if pictures and moving images could be sent to a control room. The Hakuto team consists of personnel from the private sector, including officials from the space industry firms and researchers from Tohoku University. The members began testing the performance of the rover. Team leader Takeshi Hakamada said the test was proceeding smoothly. He says it may sound like a wild dream, but progress will be made one step at a time. Locals are cheering him on. Tottori Governor Shinji Hirai says he never dreamed that sand could serve as a venue for an international experiment. He says the team has all of Tottori behind them. The project may lead to Japan's first moon rover. The Japanese team has arranged to send its rover to the moon roughly a year from now aboard a rocket operated by a U.S. firm.
Exactly 2 years have passed since Mount Ontake in central Japan erupted, leaving 63 people dead or missing. This picture of the summit was taken 5 hours after the eruption. One man is in the picture. The man, aged 57 at that time, was rescued despite being seriously injured. Our reporter talked to him and learned how he has moved on over the past 2 years, bracing the mental scars left by the disaster. On this windy day, Yasuo Suzuki revisited the mountain. He climbed the slope for the first time since the disaster. The memory of the fierce eruption has never left him. He says all he could do was just desperately try to run to safety. This picture shows Suzuki on the summit of Mount Ontake at 11:52 a.m. on September 27, 2014, when the mountain erupted. He had climbed there as the leader of a 5-member group. He lost 3 of them to the disaster. Suzuki held a news conference with some other survivors 4 days after the eruption. His left shoulder bones were fractured after they were hit by falling volcanic rocks. He also lost his memory immediately after the eruption. Suzuki says he has no memory at all of what happened after the eruption. As the leader of the group, Suzuki suffered from a deep sense of guilt for letting some of his friends die in the disaster. He says he couldn't even meet their families. Suzuki says he would even come to hate to write the letter O, the first character of Ontake. He says he was racked by guilt and didn't know what to do. But 1 year after the disaster, one incident helped him recover. He happened to find on the internet a picture of him taken shortly after the eruption. In the picture, he was standing firmly amid the volcanic ashes. It gave him courage to squarely face his tragic experience. Suzuki began to contact survivors to collect information on the situation at that time. Last week, he made his first visit to the family of one of his friends who had died. Lost her husband Yasuo to the disaster. He was fatally hit by flying volcanic rocks. Suzuki apologized for being unable to visit her sooner. He says he lost his memory for 3 days after the eruption and remained unable to give any explanation to the bereaved families. He says he is sorry for visiting her so late. Ito says Suzuki must have had a hard time over these 2 years. Suzuki was impressed with her kind words, which she had not expected. Ito says by the look of the picture, she can tell they were having a good time on the summit. Suzuki says actually they have a lot of fun on the mountain under sunny skies. Ito says her husband had looked forward to photographing the view of the Utsukushikaga Hara range from the mountain. At the end of their encounter, Ito says the spirit of her husband must be surprised to receive Suzuki at his home and must appreciate his traveling all this way to visit him. 2 days ago, Suzuki made up his mind to revisit Mount Ontake, whose name he couldn't bear to hear. He climbed the same mountain path as he did on that day with his friends.
この道ね、とみんなでね、後ろ取ってで
He was carrying a stick he used 2 years ago. He took steps toward the summit where he had left the bodies of his dead friends behind. Suzuki reached the 9th stage of the mountain route at 11:30 a.m. This is the highest point visitors are allowed to climb now. There he offered some persimmons he had picked in his garden. He had also brought the fruit on his trip 2 years ago to share with his friends.